Now, around this time and a little bit beforehand, there was a visitor to the Confederacy. His name was Colonel Arthur Fremantle of Her Majesty's esteemed Coldstream Guards. Now, he had heard over in England about the war that was going on, and he was just fascinated by it. He wanted to see what was going on. And so he actually, on his own, completely up by himself, booked passage on a ship, decided to try to sail into the Confederacy, and then just try to see what was going on in the South and see the war up front. Now, because of the Anaconda Plan and the Union blockade, he couldn't get into the South. So he was actually having to have his ship rerouted all the way into Mexico, and then he had to come up through Texas and up through the South in order to get to be around the area of Northern Virginia. And while he was there, he was delighted to see everyone drinking to the good health of the Queen and speaking so highly of the British. And for some reason, they kind of viewed him as the eyes and ears, I guess, of Queen Victoria, when he was there not in official capacity at all. He said very clearly, look, I'm just an observer. I have no authority here. But he was always fascinated by what was going on. And he said when he first got over here that he was fascinated with what he thought the North was the good and honorable ones, as he can putting it in my own words, but as he saw oftentimes the brutality of the Northern troops and the gallantry of the Southern troops, his point of view kind of shifted, because it wasn't just about slavery from his point of view on that. So his mind and loyalty kind of shifted to the South, and so he was there with the Army of Northern Virginia during the Gettysburg campaign, where he watched and he watched everything and saw everything come to a head. And what had taken place was it finally came down to Thomas Pickett's charge, and he wanted making his way over to where General Longstreet was, and he wanted basically a ringside seat, and he suggested he go to where General Longstreet is to get the best view in the house, you could say. And he was talking with Longstreet, and he wound up offering General Longstreet a drink of his own personal hip flask, and he actually gave a silver hip flask to Longstreet, which Longstreet later kept. And he watched the culmination of the battle. And what wound up happening was the battle was over. He decided it was time to head back to England. So when the Confederate Army retreated from Pennsylvania, he actually stayed behind. And he was discovered by the Union troops, but however, he was a British non-combatant, so of course nothing happened to him. So he decides to try to go ahead to the area of New York in mid-July of 1863 to try to book passage back to Britain. Around this time, or around this week actually, in the middle of July of 1863, came to what would be called the New York City draft riots. Now, what was happening was throughout the entire war, there was a kind of a frustration on behalf of the common man in the North by the fact that anyone who had money could pay someone $300 to take their place in the war and not fight in it. And that was still in effect there to the day. Whereas, many of the poorer men, many of whom being Irish, their total combined income for the entire year a lot of times came to about maybe $300, $400, maybe $500 at most. And so there's no way they could afford to pay someone. And so here they were in a situation where they were having to fight a war, and they began saying that they were fighting a war for N-words, because they said this is shortly after the Emancipation Proclamation, and many of the Irish in that area in the North were fearful of having to compete with the freed blacks for the lowest paying jobs, and they were fearful of that. And when the draft went into place, they were furious. They said not only are they freeing them, we're not going to have to compete with them for the lowest paying jobs, and now we're going to be forced to fight a war from. That was their attitude. So the riots began in mid-July, and at first they were only attacking like government buildings and military things in the New York City area, but then it quickly shifted to African Americans. There was one salesman who was attacked and brutally lynched. There was another little kid who was simply selling newspapers who got attacked, and happened from there they actually attacked orphanage for African American children in that area. Surprisingly, none of the children were harmed, but they looted the place and burnt the orphanage to the ground because they were so angry and incensed by this whole draft notion. So they finally wound up having to call like the 7th New York Infantry from Gettysburg over to New York to help quell this violence. So things finally settled down, but just to make it clear, while there were some who were very much happy about the idea of emancipation, those who feared what was going to happen because of emancipation, they reacted quite fiercely, particularly with the New York City draft riots. So that's where that is. More on that to come.